15 years ago, a devout nun suddenly vanished without a trace, as if she had never existed. The church attributed her disappearance to a crisis of faith. This was hard to believe for everyone who knew her, but they were forced to accept it, forced to remain silent. But then, a cassette tape, covered in the dust of those years, was unexpectedly played again, revealing the horrifying truth of someone acting in the name of God. December winds howled through the bare trees on Sycamore Street, coating the rusted signs pointing the way to Crestwick with a thin layer of ice. No one remembered clearly when the town had been bustling. Ever since the factory closed in the late 90s, this part of western Pennsylvania seemed to quiet down, like an old beast crawling into its lair, waiting for the cold to take its last breath. The old Cadillac pulled over to the side of the road, sparsely covered with snow. Anna Collins sat silently behind the wheel for a long time, looking at the old two-story wooden house in front of her. The steps were warped, the white paint peeling, the eaves sagging from time and frost. 15 years since she last set foot here, also in winter, also with the cold wind seeping into her skin. But that time, she had returned because of a disappearance without farewell. This time, it was because of a death without a final word. Her mother, Agnes, had passed away last week from heart failure. The nurse at the nursing home called to inform her. She didn't suffer much, they said. She passed away in her sleep. Anna didn't respond with anything more than a thank you. She had been silent for a long time before putting down the phone. Then, the very next morning, she got in the car and returned to the place that used to be home. The house still held the same musty smell of mold and decaying wood. The old kitchen creaked as she entered, dust thinly covering the dining table where her mother used to sit knitting sweaters, and her father, the man of few words, used to tune the radio to listen to the morning news. Anna gently wiped away a layer of dust on the fireplace, where the family photo still stood. Her mother, and Mary Agnes Collins, her older sister. Missing in 1995, leaving no letter, no clues, no official investigation, only a quiet announcement from the diocese. Sister Mary Agnes has left the order for personal reasons. That was it. Everyone was advised to accept the reality, and the Collins family had accepted, or rather, they had been forced to remain silent. Anna stood in the living room, where the family photos still hung on the wall, but the eyes in the photos seemed to have faded with the years. She put her suitcase on the wooden floor and took off her shawl. The winter damp seeped through the window cracks, whistling. In the house, now without her mother's voice, Anna clearly felt the void that the years and death had left behind. No one to talk to, no one to ask. She walked slowly through the hallway, stopping in front of her mother's old bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the blankets and pillows folded as if still waiting for someone to return. On the dressing table, there was a bottle of medicine with the lid open, next to an old photo of the three sisters as children. Mary was hugging Anna, smiling. A memory surged up suddenly. Her mother used to say, "I keep everything important in the attic." At the time, Anna thought she was only talking about birth certificates or photo albums. But now it was different. Now she needed to know what everything important was. Anna put her purse down and went up to the attic, where her mother used to keep things she didn't want to throw away. She opened the door, dust flying up, making her throat dry. In the middle of the messy attic was an old leather suitcase, the lock rusted. She knelt down and opened it with a little force. Inside were only papers, old photos, and a small handheld tape recorder, the kind that used cassette tapes, wrapped in a worn fabric bag. The machine lay still in her hand, carrying a strange feeling, as if it contained something that had been waiting for her for a very long time. Anna carefully checked the batteries, then pressed the play button. A buzzing sound came out first, a long silence with the rustling sound of magnetic tape moving. Then a laugh rang out, low, contemptuous, probably from a man. After that, another voice, deep, calm, but there was something rock solid about it. If she betrays her calling, then God won't defend her. Anna froze. She quickly rewound the tape, listening more carefully. That voice didn't sound like anyone in her family, and certainly not a woman's voice. Someone chuckled in the background. It seemed to be a hidden recording. No staging, no background music, just the raw sound of a threat. She stopped the tape, checking the cassette tape. On the back was a piece of paper with a smudged pencil inscription. MAC, 1995. Mary Agnes Collins. She pulled the tape out, staring intently at the faded plastic casing. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was evidence. Evidence that had been buried, deliberately hidden, as her sister had been forgotten by this world. That night, Anna lay curled up in Mary's old room. On the wall still hung a framed crucifix, slightly askew. The blanket was heavy with the smell of time. She looked up at the ceiling, unable to sleep. In her head were old images intertwined like waves crashing against the shore. Mary was calm, liked to sing hymns, write in her diary, had a habit of praying early in the morning, the hour that the church called the hour of divine mercy. She used to take care of the sick, teach children, go to nursing homes throughout the area to read scripture to the dying. Yet someone like that left the order simply because of conflicts of faith? No one in the house completely believed it, but no one dared to object. Her father, a devout Catholic, chose silence. Her mother quietly withdrew from church activities, and Anna, who was only 16 at the time, didn't know what to believe, only knew that her sister had disappeared without a word of farewell. From that day on, there was a strange void in her heart, as if her sister was neither dead nor alive, but was being held somewhere, waiting for someone to open the door. The tape recording now was the first key. The house at night was eerily quiet. Anna sat curled up in the old wooden chair in the living room, wrapped in a thick blanket, but her hands were still cold and trembling. Outside the window, the sky was gray. A snowstorm was coming. The weather forecast on the radio kept warning, avoid going out, prepare water and food. But Anna didn't care. She couldn't leave this house. Not when the old questions were coming back to life in her head, louder and louder. She opened her laptop again, connecting to the sluggish network using the town's slow connection. On the search page, she entered Mary Agnes Collins, Crestwick, Pennsylvania, 1995. The results returned only a few short articles, mostly from the parish newspaper, internal newsletters. None of the articles mentioned missing. No line used the word investigation. Only, Sister Mary Agnes leaves the St. Jude order to find inner peace. Inner peace? Anna took a deep breath. If her sister left because of a crisis of faith, because of spiritual struggles, then why hadn't anyone in the house heard a word of farewell? Why was there that recording, with threats that seemed to come from the Middle Ages? She switched to the public records section of Lackawanna County. The missing persons section in 1995 didn't have Mary's name. No open investigation records. No one had ever officially reported her sister missing. That, if it wasn't a gap, was a wall that had been deliberately erected. After a simple dinner, a slice of burnt bread and canned soup, Anna decided to check the cabinets in her mother's bedroom again. Flashlight in hand, she searched in the drawer under the bed. There was an old tin box, the kind that people used to keep letters in. Inside were faded papers, many letters from years ago, old bills, and a soft leather notebook tied with string. Clearly written, Agnes C., Personal Diary. Anna opened each page. Most of it was normal entries. It snowed early today. The apple pie was a little dry, must add more butter. But when she got to the last page, her hand stopped. I saw what I shouldn't have seen. I heard the girl crying that night. I want to speak, but every time I open my mouth I remember his eyes during the ceremony, as if God had left the chapel and only humans were left with each other. No names, no dates. But Anna knew exactly what she was talking about, the night Mary disappeared. She put the notebook down, her hand trembling slightly. Her mother lived her whole life in silence. No confrontation, no going to the police, not a word in public. But it turned out she had known, and she was afraid. What had made a woman like Agnes, a model parishioner, gentle, choose silence until the very end? The next morning, the sky was as gray as a thick curtain. The snow had covered the road, but Anna still decided to go to St. Jude Church. She drove slowly through the empty streets, the church appearing in the misty fog. The old bell tower, the mossy stone archway, the stained glass windows covered with ice. No one was standing guard at the door like before. No singing, no parishioners. A notice posted on the iron door. Sunday Mass 8 a.m. All access to historical records is temporarily suspended due to internal storage regulations. Anna pushed open the heavy wooden door. She walked slowly towards the administrative office. A man was sorting papers behind a desk, tall, thin, in his 40s, wearing a black cassock. "Excuse me," Anna said. "I would like to look up a religious record, specifically Sister Mary Agnes Collins, year 1995. The man looked up, his eyes cold and reserved. "What is your name?" "Anna Collins. I am her sister." A brief flash of surprise passed over his face. But then he closed the file, gently as if closing a page that no one was allowed to read. "I'm afraid that the St. Jude Order's records before 2000 have been archived, and according to the diocese's regulations, only authorized representatives can view them." "I don't need the entire record. Just a copy of the departure notice, or the reason for leaving the order." "Ms. Anna," he said, his voice mechanically calm. "A nun choosing to leave the order is not a sin, and you turning over the past will only prevent the departed soul from resting in peace." Anna was silent, her cheeks flushed, not because of emotion, but because of anger. She stood up, walked out, leaving the church with heavy snow falling around her shoulders, each flake like a small knife tightening into her skin. On the way back, her heart beat strongly. No longer the old pain. It was new anger, not just for Mary, but for all those who had been silenced in God's name. There are sounds, Anna realized, that no one needs to speak, because the silence itself is a kind of scream. And she, after so many years of silence, had begun to listen. The snowstorm had passed, leaving thick layers of ice frozen on the road surface. Anna stopped her car in front of the Silver Spoon Cafe, once the most famous bakery in the area when she was a child. The glass door was foggy with moisture. Inside, there were only a few elderly people chatting over cups of black coffee. The smell of cinnamon and tobacco wafted in every time the door opened. In a quiet corner near the window, a gray-haired man sat alone with an espresso. Sean Julian, former chief detective of Lackawanna County, once a familiar name in local news until 1996, then suddenly disappeared from the industry like a stain of ink being erased. Anna walked over, hesitating slightly. He looked up, his deep-set eyes lit up with a glimmer of recognition. "You look like her, your mother," he said. Anna sat down, not knowing where to start. But then she opened her bag, took out the tape recorder, and placed it on the table. No lengthy explanations. She pressed the play button. The familiar sound rang out again, the man's cold, deep voice, the sentence that had been etched into her memory. "If she betrays her calling, then God won't defend her." Sean sat still, not speaking, just looking out the window where the wind blew lightly across the foggy glass. After a while, he sighed. "I've heard that sentence. Not verbatim, but close enough. In an internal meeting of the diocese in 1995, when I was still allowed to investigate." Anna stared at him. "You opened a file on my sister." "Opened part of it," Sean replied, his voice even, "until I was advised to pay attention to other things, like chess, hiking, and writing an early retirement letter." He reached into his leather bag, pulled out an old notebook. The leather cover cracked, the edges of the pages yellowed. Flipping through a few pages, he stopped at a handwritten note, the handwriting straight and concise. "November 1995. Mary Collins reports psychological harassment by Father Doyle. No physical evidence, no witnesses. Request to keep it secret to avoid causing panic among the faithful. December 1995. Missing after late-night mass. Power outage, cameras jammed. Prayer room locked. No one confirms last seeing her leave the convent. Diocese closes the case. No further investigation. Anna finished reading, her hands growing cold. What do you think? What really happened to my sister? Sean looked up at her again. No pity, no doubt, just a very old look, like someone who had accepted that there are things in this world that cannot be fixed, only slowly untangled, like loosening a knot tied in the dark. I don't know, but I know that when someone records a threat like that, that person is being pushed into a corner. And if the diocese wants to hide this, it's possible that that girl, your sister, touched something she shouldn't have touched. He leaned back, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. I don't promise to help you, but I'll come along if you really want to dig down into the mud under that snow. Anna nodded, her eyes starting to sting. Sean nodded slightly in return. But remember, Collins, you won't get anything back except the truth. And the truth isn't always clean. In the afternoon, they drove to the old nunnery, located on St. Marian Hill where Mary used to live. The building was now sealed off, fenced with wire mesh, weeds growing nearly knee-high. The old iron gate was locked with a shiny new padlock, a clear sign that someone was still visiting regularly. The diocese announced that this place has been closed since 1996, Sean said as he looked around. But the lock was just replaced, and that barbed wire was recently rewrapped. Look at the cement under the fence. It's still damp. Anna walked around the fence, her eyes stopping at a ground floor window, where a piece of stained glass was broken, revealing the darkness inside. No bird song, no wind, no life. My sister used to pray here every morning, she said. Not in the big church, but just in this small chapel, alone. Now I understand why. Because there was probably no longer the purity of faith in God there. Sean sighed, took out a small camera, took a few pictures around the area, then raised his binoculars to look far towards the pine forest behind the chapel. Suddenly, he stopped. Anna, don't turn around, but someone just stepped out of the forest on the left, where the dirt road is. Her heart pounded. She did as he said, looking in the rearview mirror. A shadowy figure, tall, wearing a long coat, hood pulled up, was standing still, about 30 meters away from them, not moving, not saying anything, just watching. Sean pretended to take a few more pictures, then backed away towards the car. Let's go, don't look rushed. They turned their backs, walking slowly towards the car. Anna tried not to look back, but she clearly felt that gaze, cold, scrutinizing, like needles pricking the back of her neck. When she was in the seat and locked the door, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The man had disappeared. No footprints, no sound. Only a chilling feeling crept into every crevice of her clothes, crept into her thoughts. On the way back, Sean turned on the radio. A church song rang out, a steady, ethereal chorus. I used to believe in this, he said, his eyes looking far away. In justice, in God. But after 1995, I only had one thing left, silence. Anna gripped the steering wheel tightly. I don't believe much in God anymore, but I believe my sister didn't deserve to die in the dark. Sean nodded slightly. Then let's start there. And in the bleak winter afternoon, two people, a forgotten former detective, a sister with a heart full of cracks, together entered the maze of sacred vows and sins that had been buried for too long. In the days after the meeting with Sean, the snow still didn't stop falling. But this time, Anna no longer felt the cold seeping into her bones. She sat for hours by her mother's window, watching the few passers-by on the street, mostly old people, old-timers, silent figures living through decades, as if this town had never changed. But in Anna's eyes, the town had long been distorted, not because of time, but because of silence. And now, That silence was beginning to crack. The next name she looked for was Veronica Hale. Veronica, Mary's best friend when they were in the St. Jude Order, was the last person Anna clearly remembered hugging her sister on the Holy Day in 1995. At that time, Veronica was also very young, her eyes big and bright, her voice as soft as water. But only a few months after Mary disappeared, Veronica had left the order and never returned. She didn't appear in church records, nor did she attend the small memorial service that Anna's mother had quietly organized. It seemed that Veronica had completely cut off all ties with the past. It took 3 days of searching, calling 3 neighboring parishes, and a hesitant phone call to an old acquaintance at City Hall for Anna to get a vague address. A small house on the edge of Scranton, nearly 40 miles from Crestwick, a hilly area, lots of trees, few people passing by. The gray house was submerged in a thin layer of snow. Anna stopped the car, stepped out, and immediately felt the hesitation in her steps. She didn't know how Veronica would react. Would she shoo her away, avoid her, or remain silent like everyone else? She knocked on the door. No one answered. She knocked again. A slight noise came from inside. Then the door opened slightly, enough for a face to appear in the wooden frame. Veronica, older than Anna thought. Her hair was speckled with silver. Her face was thin, but her eyes were still bright. However, that light was full of caution. "I'm Anna Collins," she said. "Mary's sister." Veronica looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "I know." The silence stretched between the two women like an old string about to break. "I just want to ask a few questions. Then I'll leave." Veronica didn't open the door wider, but then she nodded slightly, turning her back inside. Anna followed her in, the door closing behind her like a stifled sigh. The house was simple, not much furniture. A picture of the cross hung on the wall, but there were no longer religious symbols like in the convents. On the table was a pot of cold tea and a stack of medical books. Anna recognized the title of one book, Psychological Trauma and Repressed Memories. "It's been a long time since I went to church," Veronica said, as if reading Anna's thoughts. She sat down in a chair, holding a cup of cold tea. Anna sat opposite her, opened her bag, and took out the tape recorder. "Have you ever heard this voice before?" She pressed the button. The sound rang out, this time softer, in the enclosed space, making it seem to whisper into her skin. "If she betrays her calling, then God won't defend her." Veronica dropped the teacup, her hands shaking. "I know that voice," she whispered. "Father Lawrence Doyle." Anna felt her heart contract. "What did he do to my sister?" Veronica was silent. She slowly stood up, went to the bookshelf, pulled out a leather notebook, opened to a dog-eared page, and handed it to Anna. The page was written in small, slanted handwriting, a passage of scripture, but with a strange note in red pencil. "The body is the mirror of the soul. The more painful the purification, the more the soul is cleansed of sin." He called it bodily penance, Veronica said softly, a form of coercion, psychological and physical, disguised with scripture. He said that Mary had sinned against God for doubting her calling, for having bad thoughts. He ordered her to be punished. Anna couldn't speak. "At first, it was nightly penances," Veronica continued. "Then there were holy communications that only he could attend. No one else was allowed to witness, and if she refused, she was locked up in the vestry for 3 days straight. No light, no water." She sat down again, her eyes wet. "I heard her crying, but I didn't have the courage to do anything. I was afraid." Anna clenched her fist. She had never thought of such a cruel form, especially with someone like Mary. "That night," Veronica said, her voice like a dream, "when Mary disappeared, the whole convent lost power. No one was allowed to leave their rooms. But I saw the diocese's car come around midnight. No horn, no lights. They went inside, then left, and from then on, your sister was no longer present." Anna felt her throat tighten. Tears welled up, not torrentially, but like falling drops, as heavy as stones. "She cried for help," she said, speaking for the first time what had long been smoldering, "and no one heard." Veronica burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. "I'm sorry. I've lived 15 years in cowardice, but I've never forgotten her. Not a single day." Anna stood up, went to her side, not knowing what to say, except to gently put her hand on her shoulder. They stood like that, two women who had loved Mary in different ways, sharing a loss that was too late to save, but not too late to return the truth. On the way out, Anna looked at the notebook still in her hand, reading again the line Veronica had copied. "Purification is never violence, unless it is not of God." The cold wind blew through the dry trees, carrying the unspoken words for 15 years. And now, they were beginning to be heard again. On the way back after the meeting with Veronica, Anna flipped through Sean's old notes, the handwriting slanted, some places circled in red ink. There was a page underlined 3 times with the words, "Parish Library, Basement, Ministry Archives before 1995. Sean glanced over as she pointed to it. "I applied for access, was denied," he said softly. "After that, the back door was relocked. But I remember when I was still serving, there was a side entrance for the night cleaner. It connected to the back iron gate." Anna was silent, then nodded. If Mary really had evidence and used to work at St. Jude, then the only place she could hide something was where everything that belonged to her had been swept away. The old ministry library. And so that night, they returned. The iron gate behind the St. Jude Parish Library creaked loudly as Sean gently pried it open with a crowbar. Anna glanced around one last time. No lights, no cars, only darkness and bare trees trembling in the wind. "Quickly," Sean whispered. "We will find the most compelling evidence left." They slipped through the gap in the door, entering the library's backyard. This place used to be the diocese's archive, but after 2005 it was declared out of use due to structural degradation. However, the motion sensor lights in the hallway were still dimly lit when they got inside, which made Anna shiver even more than the darkness. The cold stone hallway led them to a wooden door carved with a cross, which used to be a special records room reserved for the parish's secret files. Sean pulled out a small key, the kind used for old filing cabinets. He had kept it from his time in the industry and had used it in a church treasury paper theft case. The door opened with a creaking hinge. Inside was a windowless room, filled with the smell of old paper and dried ink. The filing cabinets were numbered by hand. Sean walked straight to the innermost corner, where the stone wall was slightly stained yellow, different from the rest. "I remember seeing the builders redo this part of the wall in late 1995, he said quietly. "The diocese said it was to prevent moisture, but it wasn't raining that day, and they made them do it at night." He tapped lightly on each brick, stopping at a patch that sounded hollow. With a skillful pry, Sean removed the bricks, revealing a small safe hidden in the wall. Anna held her breath as he entered the numbers. Mary's birthday. The safe clicked softly. Inside wasn't much. A yellow envelope carefully sealed with wax, with the words written on the outside in faded ink, "Archbishop of Philadelphia, top secret." Sean opened it. The paper inside was a handwritten letter, the soft, slanted handwriting, painfully familiar to Anna. "Your Excellency, if this letter reaches your hands, then I beg you to believe what I am about to write, not for me, but for the others who will be hurt if this silence continues. I, Mary Agnes Collins, have been forced to participate in forms of spiritual cleansing that go against the faith. It is abuse in God's name. I have been isolated, threatened, and warned that if I reveal it, my soul will be burned. But I do not believe that God would condone the darkness. I have recorded some conversations as evidence, because if no one believes me, at least the machines will not lie. I keep them in a safe place and draw a map so that you can find them. If anything happens to me, please take this as my last will and testament. Sincerely, Mary Agnes Collins. Under the letter, clipped with a rusty staple, was a small piece of paper, a hand-drawn map, blurred but still readable. It was a diagram of the old nunnery on St. Marian Hill, and behind the stone altar, where the tiles were diagonally shaped like a cross, there was a very clear X mark. Anna reached out to touch the map. She had the feeling that Mary was somewhere, leading the way with her own breath that had turned into paper and ink, no longer vague memories. This was real, a trace. Sean folded the paper, putting it in his inner coat pocket. He turned to Anna, his eyes serious. These things are enough to reopen the case. It's understandable that they're willing to do anything to keep these things from getting out into the light. Anna nodded slightly. She felt something was changing, as if her feet had just stepped through a door that couldn't be turned back. Reaching the parking lot, they were just preparing to leave when Sean stopped. "Wait." He knelt down next to Anna's car's rear tire. A long, deep cut, leaking dirty rubber. The tire was flat. On the windshield, a handwritten note clipped under the wiper. Anna picked it up, turning it over. Blue ink, as if someone had just written it a few hours ago. "The Holy Virgin will not be resurrected." She clenched the paper, her heart racing. Sean took it, examining it. "This is no joke." "No," Anna replied. "This is a warning." She looked up towards the library. All the doors were pitch black, but a distinct feeling. Someone knew they were here. Sean opened the trunk, took out a spare tire kit. While he was changing the tire, Anna stood guard, her eyes fixed on the darkness thickening around the church's backyard. Arriving at her mother's house, Anna spread the pieces of evidence on the table. Mary's letter, the map, the tape recorder, her mother's diary, and Sean's notes. She looked at each thing as if she was sitting in an interrogation session. But instead of questioning someone, this time, Mary was leading the way. "You didn't remain silent," she whispered. "You tried your best to speak, and now I hear you." She played the recording again, but this time, not just hearing the threat, but at the end of the tape, very small, almost lost in the tape hiss, there was a breath, very light, very shaky. Not from the person making the threat, but from Mary. A last breath or a final effort to record something, as if to prove she didn't leave. She was taken. Anna gripped the map in her hand. Tonight, Mary had brought her to the final step, and behind that stone table, maybe the end of the story, or the beginning of a bigger truth. The night wind on St. Marian Hill didn't scream, didn't whistle through the cracks in the rocks. It just blew steadily, slowly, like an old soul still lingering where a secret had been hidden. Anna stood on the path leading into the chapel area, holding a flashlight, her heart beating in her chest like a bell ringing down memory. Behind her was Sean, carrying a small toolbox. Next to him was Dr. Kieran Dans, Sean's old friend, former forensic doctor of the county, who had retired early after a case was hindered by orders from above. He was short, with graying hair, sharp eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses, not needing many words to express experience. "We only have a few hours," Sean said quietly, "before tomorrow morning's snowstorm covers the tracks." The chapel gate opened under Anna's hand. The map Mary drew pointed directly to the stone table, a rough granite block, quietly located at the end of the main hall, between the dilapidated rows of seats that had collapsed. Anna shone the light on the floor behind the altar. The old glazed tiles had been replaced with cement. The cement was smooth, a different color, clear signs of construction. "This cement was poured last," Kieran said as he knelt down, touching the floor. "Doesn't match the rest. And the pour extends beyond what is necessary. People are hiding something underneath this cement." Sean began to dig around the edge of the floor, as carefully as operating on an old wound. Kieran used a handheld detector, then nodded. "There's something underneath." Anna slumped down, using her hands to sweep away the dust. The bricks gradually came loose. And then, the cement gave way to a rectangular metal box. No lock, no carving. Kieran breathed out, then opened the box with a short shovel blade. The pungent smell of decay rose, even after more than 10 years. They looked down together. Silence. Inside was an almost complete skeleton, neatly arranged, wrapped in a layer of rotten black cassock fabric. On the neck bone was a broken rosary, the broken wire wrapped around it as if it had been squeezed too tightly, then snapped off. Next to it was a silver name tag with faded letters, but still clear. Sister Mary Agnes. Anna knelt down, her eyes glued to the tag as if unable to leave. No more doubt, no more ambiguity. Her sister, who used to sit teaching her to sing hymns on snowy mornings, who had hugged her when her father died without shedding a tear, had been lying here for 15 years, in the dark, alone. Kieran shined the flashlight straight at the skull. All three saw a large crack on the left temple, indented as if struck by a hard object. Not an accident. Impossible suicide. A blow with enough force, Kieran said quietly, and no signs of trying to hide the corpse carefully, meaning they thought no one would ever find her. Anna said nothing. She knelt down, her hands clutching the hem of her muddy clothes. "You waited," she whispered. "Waited for me to find you." Sean put his hand on her shoulder. "We have it all. Maps, recordings, skeletons, cracks. The evidence is undeniable." But at that moment, a strange sound rang out outside the chapel door, the sound of wheels grinding on ice. All three held their breath. Anna turned off the flashlight. Sean signaled to be silent, took out his phone. A black van without license plates stopped right in front of the entrance. The car door opened. A man stepped out, a long black robe, a priest's collar peeking out. In his hand was a file, and eyes that had been waiting for a long time. "What are you doing here?" His voice echoed, deep and dry. Sean stepped out of the shadows, his voice stern. "Restoring a case buried by crimes in the name of God." The man pulled out a stack of papers. "I have authorization from the St. Jude Diocese. What you find is the property of the church. Please hand it over." Anna stepped forward, her eyes not leaving the man's face. She had never seen him before, but the way he didn't ask, didn't surprise, only ordered, made all her senses contract. Sean took a step back, took out his phone and dialed an emergency number. "FBI. Live on the air. The call is being recorded. You've gone too far." The man pursed his lips, his eyes wavering slightly. A siren rang out from a distance, echoing from the foot of the hill. Headlights flashed from afar, sweeping across the hillside. The van immediately turned around. When the FBI arrived, everything was recorded. The remains, the cracks, personal items. Anna stood outside, watching the forensic staff collect her sister's remains with white gloves. No one said anything, only the wind and the snow, and the sound of the rosary beads being blown by the wind, hitting the stone, tinkling like a morning bell. A female agent came to Anna's side, her voice gentle. "DNA will officially verify. But with this evidence, your sister's case will certainly be reopened." Anna nodded, not speaking. In her heart, all emotions seemed to be stretched to the extreme, but no longer chaotic. There was only a quiet serenity spreading, as if Mary had left the cold stone to return to a world with light. She looked down at the dug-up ground and knew. The burial place was no longer a grave, but a gateway to the truth. And from here, no one would be allowed to fill it in again. The east wind whistling on the roof of the FBI headquarters Scranton branch, as if the weather itself was trying to turn over the secrets that were buried. On the meeting table covered with documents, a thin file opened, in which DNA samples taken from the patella of the skeleton under the chapel had been matched. The results were beyond doubt. Mary Agnes Collins, the missing nun since 1995, was the biological daughter of Elaine Collins, Anna's mother. As the forensic examiner read the conclusion again, Anna only sat in silence. no tears, no words. Only the confirmation until end in her heart. Her sister had not left by herself, as those old announcements ever said. Press like smelling blood. Titles blazing on the computer screen. Body of missing nun 15 years ago found under diocese chapel. Old files explode again. Church faces, murder suspicions. Bodily penance, the dark side of holiness. Each right like a hoe turning over deep soil, excavate the truth no one can hide. 2 days later, 3 women came to the police station in the city. Not on appointment, not together. But all bring the same story. Once the nuns in St. Jude Diocese, once suffer spiritual guidance from Father Lawrence Doyle, and ever silent. They bring diary, handwritten letter, a drawing small room behind the ceremony, where Mary ever kept in 3 last days. One of those 3 is Claire Rooney, now residing in a nursing home. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were surprisingly lucid. I've been afraid for 20 years, but if someone who's dead dares to speak, then I must speak too. As testimony piled upon testimony, the financial records from the bishop's office were ordered to be reopened. Among them, prominent were the special assistance expenses under assumed names, signed and approved by Bishop Edward Connors, the former head of the diocese who had passed away in 2008. These expenses coincided with the dates when internal complaints disappeared. There were at least 3 instances where internal disciplinary records were drafted but never completed. The reason? Insufficient evidence, or the accuser has withdrawn. Veronica, the only friend who dared to retain the memory of Mary, now appeared before the media, no longer hiding. She wore her old coat, her hand trembled slightly as she held a copy of the letter Mary had written, her voice breaking. I couldn't protect her, but I can protect the truth. The community began to shake. Every shared message, every old conversation was dredged up. Some remembered Mary, the girl who often smiled, who liked to keep order in the church's small library. Some had overheard that she didn't listen to the priest. Now, those seemingly innocuous memories became connecting lines, piecing together the portrait of a forgotten victim. Anna was invited to an internal hearing by the diocese, a clear move to appease public opinion. She sat in the middle of a cold, white room, facing the faces that had once ignored her sister's death. Before the camera lights, she pulled out the old cassette tape, placed it on the table, and said only one sentence. You said it was an unidentified voice. Now the whole country is hearing it. The FBI confirmed the pursuit of Father Lawrence Doyle, who had been removed from the parish records in 2002. And after months of investigation, they arrested him at the Canadian border using forged papers under a new name. Faced with the murder charge, Doyle remained completely silent, allowing only his lawyer to speak. The courtyard of the federal court in Philadelphia that morning was as cold as marble covered in frost. But the crowd standing outside, holding signs, wearing woolen scarves, did not leave. They came to see not just the trial of one man, but a trial of memory, of justice delayed for nearly 2 decades. Father Lawrence Doyle was escorted into the court in gray prison clothes, his white hair neatly combed, his eyes looking straight ahead as if he were still giving mass. Not a bow of the head, not a word of apology. The man who was once called the senior spiritual advisor in the St. Jude Diocese was now the main defendant in a state criminal case with charges of first-degree murder, abusing religious belief to cover up criminal acts, and intentionally destroying evidence. His lawyer, a shrewd middle-aged man who had represented many sensitive cases involving religious organizations, began with a cold statement. My client was not present at the scene of the crime. There were no witnesses, no cameras, and the body was never officially reported missing. We assert, not guilty. Anna sat in the middle of the gallery, her eyes fixed on the man sitting 20 meters away from her. She no longer felt the anger she had felt in the early days. Now, the emotion in her was a different kind of silence. Not the forced silence of the past, but the silence of someone who knew the truth, not needing anyone to confirm it. The FBI presented the evidence one by one. The tape recording, in which Doyle's voice rang out, mocking and threatening. Mary Collins' handwritten letter detailing the abusive acts, isolation, and threats steeped in superstition. The hand-drawn map leading to the burial site, written by Mary before her disappearance. The DNA test results, proving that the body was Mary's. Witnesses, Veronica and 2 other nuns, all recounting the penance sessions full of mental and physical torture. The climax came when Kieran, the forensic doctor, was invited to the witness stand. He described the skull fracture in precise medical language, then paused for a beat, his voice deep. "They can deny all the truth, but the traces from the skeleton don't know how to lie." The lawyer objected. The judge allowed him to continue. Doyle still sat there, his hands placed in front of his abdomen, his face unchanged. Occasionally, he glanced at the jury as if he were teaching them a silent catechism lesson. But Anna knew. Deep in those eyes was no longer faith, only a bitter emptiness. 3 days of debate passed. Each piece of evidence, each testimony, each image of Mary projected onto the large screen like each needle pricking the blood-stained robe. On the day of sentencing, the court was packed. Anna sat with Sean, her hands tightly gripping the rosary that her sister used to wear, the rosary that was now only half complete. The judge read the verdict from the jury. The defendant, Lawrence Doyle, is found guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentences: life imprisonment without parole. No one applauded. No one cheered. In the courtroom, there was only the sound of pens signing, the click of tape recorders, and the sound of the wind from the crack in the door seeping in, carrying with it a new layer of early winter snow. Doyle didn't say a word. As he was led away, he only glanced at Anna once. The gaze was not pleading, not admitting fault, just an empty look from someone who no longer believed in anything. The only thing he believed in, the power disguised in holiness, had now fallen from his shoulders forever. After the trial, the Vatican issued a short statement. The Church regrets the harm that has occurred and is committed to reviewing internal oversight mechanisms. But no one hoped for those distant promises anymore. The most unexpected thing came from behind the scenes. A special internal committee was formed, reviewing the legacy of Bishop Edward Connors, the former head of the diocese who had died since 2008. In an unprecedented move, his name was removed from St. Jude Basilica, where he had been solemnly buried. Connors' remains were quietly moved to an anonymous tomb at the request of his family to preserve the tranquility of the community. But the people understood, not for the sake of tranquility, but because the truth did not allow for a false memorial to remain. Anna returned to the small town, passing St. Jude Church. The gate still creaked in the wind, but this time she didn't stop in. She knew she didn't need to step into that place to find forgiveness anymore. Sean called her the next day, his voice relieved. "Do you find it strange? When justice comes, it's not as noisy as we imagine. No drums, no trumpets." "Yes," Anna replied, "because the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be looked at directly." She stood on the hill where the chapel used to be. Now it was a level ground, no more cement to hide. Only a newly erected stone tablet, small, simple, no name, only one sentence engraved by hand. "As long as one person listens, the truth is not dead." A little girl ran past, stopped, looked at Anna, and then placed a white flower on the tablet. No one told her to do that, no one taught her, and in that moment, Anna knew. There was no redemption for the darkness, only light, and the child of light, this time, did not die in silence anymore. After the court ruling, the St. Jude Diocese was forced to completely demolish the remaining part of the chapel. No official announcement, no community notification. It was an act of avoidance, but also an unspoken acknowledgement. That place was no longer sacred. It could not continue to exist as a place of worship. On that flattened land, the diocese erected a small stone tablet. No holy statues, no flower fences, no name of Mary Agnes Collins. The lead-gray tablet, not even up to the head of an adult, stood forlornly in the windy hill. But that morning, Anna Collins carried a small fabric bag, walking alone on the old dirt road leading to where her sister had been hidden in the dark. No press, no police. No one was watching. She sat down in front of the tablet, taking out a small knife and a crumpled piece of paper from the bag. On the paper was a line written in her sister's handwriting, the last line in the letter that was never sent. Each line trembled, but resolute. If you are reading this, perhaps I am no longer here. But if one person is still listening, the truth is not dead. Anna began to carve on the back of the tablet, one stroke at a time, with the same fruit knife that her mother used to use in the old days. Each stroke was a silent prayer, a partial echo sent back to where her sister had departed. It took nearly 3 hours. Her hands were blistered, the wind made her nose red, but she didn't stop. When she was finished, she stepped back, reading the words as if seeing them for the first time. No need for names, no need for dates. That sentence was enough to remember a person. There was no memorial mass. No one made the sign of the cross. No priest prayed or lit a candle. But around late afternoon, when the sunlight flickered through the thin clouds, a faint step sounded on the stone path. A little girl came, her curly brown hair neatly tied, her hand holding a white flower. She didn't look at Anna, only bowed very low before the tablet, then gently placed the flower right at its foot. Anna looked at her, her lips parting to ask her name, but then stopped. She knew she was Veronica's daughter. No need for introductions, no need for conversation. Just that presence was enough. No one told her to do that. Veronica's voice rang out behind her, deep and warm. She said, she dreamed of a woman singing a lullaby by the window. Then she woke up in the morning, insisting on coming here. Anna nodded slightly. Nothing was surprising. The deepest things often don't need explanation. She sat down by the tablet. The wind blew into her collar, her eyes looking far towards the small town at the foot of the hill. Everything passed quickly like a dream. The trials, the news reports, the anger. But in Anna's heart, only one thing remained. Silence. Not the forced silence of the past, but the quiet when knowing everything was finally in place. "You were never weak," she whispered, as if talking to the stone, to the earth, or to someone standing behind the wind. "You spoke before anyone believed. And I finally heard." A strong wind blew through, carrying with it a few sprigs of dry grass and the scent of jasmine from somewhere drifting over. Anna closed her eyes, letting the wind blow through each strand of hair, carrying with it the warmth that seemed no longer to exist. She didn't cry. There were no more tears to fall. But in her heart, something very old, very deep, that had been sealed for 15 years, was gently opening, like an old door being oiled, like an ancient prayer being read again, slowly, clearly. Under the tablet, the white flower was still intact. A small bee flew to it, circled a few times, then landed on the petals. The little girl watched, smiling. No one taught her to do that. No one made her remember someone who had died before she was born. But, as Anna had always believed, if there is one person still listening, the truth is not dead. And in that windy afternoon, Mary Agnes Collins, the forgotten, the erased, the buried deep under the cement of sin, had obtained what she had long awaited, a sister who did not give up, a word that was re-engraved, and a flower arriving at the right time. 1 year later, the small town in western Pennsylvania seemed to have changed its skin. The winter snow melted earlier than usual, leaving streaks of moisture like long-standing memories being wiped clean on the old sidewalks. The oak tree in front of the Collins house had begun to sprout, and the sound of children playing ball in the alleys had also returned. Anna's mother's old house was no longer a place to store darkness. After a community meeting and a small grant from the state, that place had been converted into the Collins Community Library, Mary Memorial Room. Not large, not modern, but bright, quiet, and full of books. A wooden sign hung modestly in front. "Here, every voice is heard. That morning, Anna returned. She had returned to Boston for a while to complete the sale of her old apartment, arranging her work. But something, or someone, always pulled her back to this town, as if closing the journey was also the beginning of another circle. Inside the library, a group of high school students was sitting in a circle, wearing headphones, their eyes following a tape running in the cassette player. A young teacher explained, "This is a recording of a person named Mary Collins, Anna's sister, who was a nun at St. Jude. She used to record her feelings and reflections. Don't just listen with your ears, try to listen with your heart." Anna stood behind the glass door, not entering. She saw the young faces, one frowning, one silent, one nodding in time with the words. In the quiet space, Mary's voice rang out, distant but clear. Faith should not be a shackle. It is a path. And if one day that path leads you into the darkness, then be the one to bring the light. A teenager looked up, turned to the friend next to him, whispering something. They both nodded, and in that moment, Anna knew Mary was still alive, in awareness, in stories, in every breath of the generation that had never met her. The corner wall at the end of the library was a dark brown bookshelf with a small sign. In memory of Mary Agnes Collins, 1972 to 1995. On the shelf were a few copies of Mary's handwritten letters, notes on the case, and a translation of the contents of the cassette tape for the hearing impaired. There was also a photo of her sister, not a grim press photo, but an everyday photo. Mary reading a book under a tree, a slightly sad smile, her eyes looking up towards the sun. Anna sat down on a chair next to the shelf, gently touching the cassette player placed there. Still the same machine from years ago, now rewired, cleaned, and functioning perfectly, as if it had never rusted. She didn't play the tape right away. Instead, she opened a handwritten letter folded neatly in a cream-colored envelope. A letter from Veronica, sent from a small village in Vermont. "Dear Anna, my little one, she wants to study the psychology of religion," she said. "If I understand why faith is distorted, then maybe it will help someone not fall into that black hole like Mary used to be." I didn't say anything, just hugged her tightly. And in my heart, I whispered, "Thank you to you, because if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have dared to let my daughter believe in anything anymore." Anna smiled. The letter folded. Her heart warmed as if someone had lit a fire inside, not because she was being thanked, but because the broken chain from 1995 had its first connection. In her coat pocket, she took out a postcard from Florida, a beach with swaying palm trees and bold handwritten words. "I know I'm old, but I'm still strong enough to play a few games of chess on the beach. Say hello to Mary if you still believe she's listening. Sean. P.S. We did the right thing." Anna placed the postcard on the shelf, right next to Mary's photo. Then she reached out, gently pressing the play button on the tape recorder. The familiar buzzing sound rang out, then Mary's voice appeared, gentle, steady. "If you are hearing this, perhaps I am no longer here. But don't be afraid. There are fears that will pass when you don't go alone." She didn't play the whole tape. Just that one sentence was enough to fill a long year of struggle, of pain, of remorse and forgiveness. Outside the window, the sun set like gold pouring on the roof. A child passed by, turned into the library, saw Anna and waved. She nodded back, then stood up, leaving the chair. On the table, the cassette player was still running, but no one turned it off, because in that room, everyone was listening. And when someone listens, no one truly dies. Under that afternoon light, Mary's final words were not just a will, they were an echo, a drop of light. After winter, you must have felt helpless before a hidden truth, not because you don't want to know, but because of the fear of facing things that can make you collapse. If you have read this far, perhaps in your heart, there is also someone who has not been spoken, a distorted memory, a wound that no one believes is real. Anna and Mary's story is not just a case, but a bell calling back the truth, even if it has to ring from under the earth. We wrote this story based on inspiration from many forgotten records, where justice was once overshadowed by the name of holiness. The names, locations have been fictionalized, but the emotions and experiences are the most real things we want to keep. If this story makes you stop and think, please share it in WhatsApps. Maybe you know someone who has been forced to remain silent. Maybe someone is trying to survive in a chapel without light. Or maybe, simply, they need to know that there are voices that refuse to be erased. Send this story to someone you trust, because who knows, you or they will be the first to dare to listen. And when someone listens, the truth is no longer buried.